Okay, Celeste, when did you first become interested in the art of conversation? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, because I had been a reporter and a correspondent for years, and then I got a job as the anchor of an NPR show, radio show, and
Yeah.
I had never had to do that job before, not really. And so I was started to do research on how to become a better interviewer, because an interview is a formalized conversation, a formalized, time limited conversation.
Absolutely.
And so I started doing research on that. And I think made me dig deeper is because the advice that I got was bad. We had for so long been getting all that advice on, like I say in the TED Talk, nod your head, smile, say mirror your
Right.
body language. And I I hosted a daily talk show where I could test out every one of those things in my little conversational laboratory, right? And so if they
Yeah.
said maintain eye contact, I could try that. Um,
When
and
you're doing a daily show, the amount of practice you're getting in conversation is unmatched.
absolutely, yeah, it makes it for a great experimental laboratory, right?
Totally.
And I found that maintaining eye contact is awkward and makes people feel really uncomfortable. Um, so, and that's what I found about almost all the advice that we've been getting for so long,
Wow.
is that it didn't work. And then I had to do it myself, right? Then I had to go and find
Yeah.
the research studies that actually related and then
Hmm.
test those out to see what actually worked.
Did you grow up in a conversational family?
If you call arguing a conversation, I mean, yes, there was a lot of talking,
Right.
but I'm not sure it was a conversational family, because conversations are more about listening than talking. So I grew up in a very verbal family. I mean, honestly, people who knew me when I was younger,
Yeah.
like my college friends, were like, I can't believe you're now known for conversation. Because I was the worst, just the worst. I was
Really?
awful. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was a know it all and interrupted people all the time and got super excited about stuff and would keep talking and talking and talking. Oh, I was
Oh my
horrible.
God.
Just horrible.
Do you think that you are living proof that conversation and asking questions is a learned skill?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
if I can do it, literally anyone can. You know, just to break it down to evolutionary terms here, our species has survived through conversation. That's literally how we have always, in 300,000 years and change, made up for our fragility.
Yeah.
We're slow. We're very easy to kill. We don't have defensive mechanisms like talons or venom or whatever. But the way that we have survived is through conversation and collaboration. And I say that to say that every Homo sapiens has a high level of communication and conversational skill. That is
Yeah.
generational knowledge, the same way that a dolphin uses sonar, right? And a bat uses echolocation.
Yeah.
So we start at this extremely sophisticated level, perhaps the most sophisticated communicators on the planet. After that, yeah, a lot of people think it's a talent, that some people are born as
Hmm.
great conversationalists and some people never will be, but it's really not. It's really a skill that you can practice and learn and improve.
I think so too. I've seen it in my own life. I do feel a little bit lucky in the conversation realm because um, my dad and my grandfather were expert conversationalists. My grandfather was a professor. I think a lot of time professors are just very well spoken, glib. They practice conversations a lot too. So I do think I picked things up as I was growing up. But to your point, I only learned through my job that conversations are really about listening. And that's a huge element that I think we're missing. You mentioned your TED Talk. It's one of the 10 most watched talks posted on TED's homepage. That's pretty remarkable. What does that tell
Yeah.
you about the state of our world right now and what people are seeking?
I mean, I think that's really optimistic, right? I mean, it means that a lot of people have put some version of how do I improve my conversation skills into the search string,
Yeah.
right? In some way, people make it to my TED Talk because either someone else has said, this is really good, you have to watch it, or they're looking specifically for that. And I think that's really hopeful. I also think it's really a great sign that a lot of the people who really watched the TED Talk and have watched it multiple times and have, then read the book are
Mhm.
younger people. number one, flies in the face of the stereotype that, there's some older people who think, oh, young people don't know how to talk to each other. They don't have any
Wow.
social skills, et cetera, et cetera. They're buried in their phones. But that's completely not true. Young people are seeking out social connection. Young people have the exact same high level of social skills and conversational skills as any other generation. The only difference, and when I say young people, I'm not necessarily meaning millennials anymore. That's not the young generation.
I feel
I,
personally attacked, Celeste, but
I'm
okay, Gen
sorry.
Z, fine.
Gen Z and then Alpha, of course. The only difference is that the younger generation is more likely to believe that texting back and forth is the same as a conversation. And it very much is not by any measure. And it does not fulfill the inherent need for belonging and community that all human beings have. That literally is such an inherent need that we will die without it. Loneliness will kill you. So that's what makes
Mhm.
Gen Z and maybe Alpha, we'll see, the loneliest generation on record, because they haven't, even though they seek out connection, they haven't quite realized that social media does not fulfill
Yeah,
that texting back and forth or DMing or WhatsApping or whatever you
right.
use does not fulfill it.
When I think about the impact of emojis or GIFs or memes, I always think of emojis as hieroglyphics. What are they called?
Yeah, hieroglyphics.
Hieroglyphics. So I don't want to discount them, but it is not the same. When I have a really great conversation, I feel so energized, so fulfilled. That's the word that you use, fulfilled. And actually, I haven't thought about the other word you used, which is belonging. Why do you think great conversations, is there a psychological or even neurological explanation for that feeling? Like, is there a reason some conversations are more memorable and impactful than others?
So I'm going to answer this in a couple ways because there's so much evidence. I could bury you in evidence.
Bury me. Do it.
But I'll start with first.
Okay.
Have you ever called up a friend and they say hello and you say, what's wrong?
Yes.
That is how quickly some extremely sophisticated and nuanced information is translated to your brain just through the sound of somebody's voice.
Oh,
Our voices are uniquely evolved and designed to communicate meaning in a way that no written communication, I mean, written communication is pretty recent in our
yeah.
history.
Yeah.
For most of our history, our culture, our knowledge was passed down just through our voices. We got really good at communicating meaning through the sound of your voice. So that if you ask me to do something and I say, maybe, that's really different than me going, maybe, right?
Yep.
But I'm glad that you mentioned neurologically, because let me tell you about just one particular area of research. And it's a research into a phenomenon that's known as neural coupling. So the original experiment occurred at Princeton. And Uri Hassan wanted to figure out what actually happens in the brain when somebody really clicks in. Like, we know what it looks like in the brain when someone's really listening, right? First of all, it lights up like crazy. Like, listening uses a huge amount of your gray cells. And so he would bring people in and he would hook everybody up to an fMRI, and he would have some people telling stories, real stories from their own lives.
Hmm.
And so for one of them, it was a young woman, and she's telling the story of her high school prom, which I guess was tragic and awful. Like, everything went wrong. And then he had everybody come in and listen to her story. And what they discovered they never expected, which was that when the participants began to listen in an engaged way, their brain waves began to move in exact sync with hers. Exact sync. In fact, sometimes at some points, the sync was so exact that the listeners' brains anticipated changes in the speakers' brains by a fraction of a second. And I just want you to think about this for a moment.
Yeah.
This is what we try to replace with emojis, right? Nothing against emojis, but that is mind meld.
Mm-mm.
That is the kind of authentic connection, the kind of bond you can create with a complete stranger through the most analog equipment that there is, right? Your voice and your ears. Now, there's really similar and parallel research into ASL and the non-hearing community, but right now we're just talking about the speaking community. And there is no way you can replicate that, replace it with anything else. There is nothing else more sophisticated than what lives in our heads.
Yeah. You know, you're making me think too, when people pass, the first thing that we say is either, I miss their smell or I miss the sound of their voice. It is so powerful. This
Yeah,
is a little bit of a left turn, but I've been thinking a lot about small talk lately. I saw this video between Simon Sinek and Trevor Noah online. And Trevor said that small talk gets a bad rap because it connects us. And
totally agree.
you agree?
Absolutely agree.
Well, I just want to finish his quote and then get your thoughts on it, because I used to despise small talk, and I think his video changed my opinion. He said, small talk connects us and big talk separates us. It is in small talk that we find similarities. And once you find those similarities, it's easier to then ask, how do you plan to vote? Which is the big talk. And
Right.
I do that with my interviews. I start small and then I try and go in. Do you do the same thing?
Sometimes. I mean, obviously, I'm a journalist, so and I'm on live radio, so we don't always get the time
Yes.
to wind up to it. But I will say this, and again, I'm a nerd about this stuff, so I'm going to bury you in a lot of science here.
Yeah.
First of all, we get just as much bang for the buck from a tiny interaction, and people call them micro interactions, right? The little interactions, you get a boost in your sense of belonging when someone waves to you on the street. You get a boost in your mood when someone makes eye contact with you, when someone says your name. That is how beautifully designed we are to take benefit from really authentic interactions with other people. Negotiations that begin with a handshake are double digits more likely to end successfully. So during the pandemic, we actually got quite a bit of research into what happens when people get isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And we discovered the power of those tiny little interactions because we'd lost them. Right?
Yeah.
Commenting about the weather when you're speaking to your barista, telling the grocery store clerk that you like her brooch. We lost them all. And it's one of the things that really contributed to people's feelings of loneliness, because we underestimated how important those casual interactions are. They're really important. And the average person, when they're not in a pandemic isolation, has somewhere between 15 to 25 a day. And they contribute a lot to people's sense of belonging. In this moment when there's all this angst over DEI, which is a whole nother subject. For me, all these discussions about diversity is just learning to live and respect other people who aren't like you, right? Equity is just about being fair to everybody, whether you like them or not, right? Whether you agree with them or not. Inclusion is the most important one, because belonging is the most powerful need our species has after food, shelter, and water. In fact, it's on a par with food, shelter, and water in terms of its importance to our health. And that's what inclusion is about. It's just feeling like you belong. Everybody knows what it feels like to not belong. Everyone has walked into a room or been in high school and felt that feeling. Maybe it's your in-laws, whatever, when someone's trying to let you know that you don't belong.
And the littlest thing can make you feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, just a side glance, but even these tiny little remarks, sometimes they'll say an inside joke and everyone will laugh except you, right? Like, we know what that feels like.
Absolutely.
And it's awful. And these little interactions that we have, they boost people's sense of belonging. When you get a new neighbor to your neighborhood, just see if they're coming out of the driveway, make eye contact, wave hello, say their name if you know it or remember it. Those tiny little things are not to be discounted. They're super important. Now, the big talk, he's talking about big talk that relates to politics. Big talk is anything that takes us more than a few minutes, right?
Right. It could be childhood trauma. It could run the gamut.
Yeah, it could be whether you like sweet or savory cornbread. Like, some things are serious, But I mean, I don't know what the experience is like
That's
for
funny.
you, but because of my job,
Right.
there's a certain demographic that likes to pick a fight with me over politics because they're trying to prove that they know more about politics than I do.
Hmm.
They do not. It's been my job for over 2 decades. Um, and I have found to do the 3 questions game, which is where I say, okay, we're not going to agree on that, which is fine. But I bet you in 3 questions, I can find something we agree on. And it's always something like tacos or dogs are better than people or, what's your favorite season? It's always something like that. But those are
Right.
not small things. Those are not trivial. For our species, those are important and you can build a relationship on them.
So it's interesting that you mentioned disagreement because that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. David Brooks has this quote. He says the real act of building a friendship or creating a community involves performing a series of small concrete social actions well, disagreeing without poisoning the relationship. Is there a way that we can learn to disagree better? Because I think there are so many benefits to being friends with people whose opinions you disagree with, even often.
I mean, the first thing is just to understand that you're going to disagree. Look,
Right.
even with the person you love most in the world, you are not going to tell me you agree on everything. Not true. That is not true.
I don't even want to. Do you?
No, of course not. That's so, yeah, no,
It's
that's be
boring.
incredibly boring. But you don't. There's no such thing as 2 people who are in complete agreement. I mean, maybe a clone, but I would imagine they would disagree also. So that's number one, is just accept that you will disagree. And so therefore you're not avoiding disagreement, which is what
Hmm.
most people do. They're doing everything they can to avoid conflict. Accept that it's going to happen. And because disagreement is going to happen, you're also going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing. Accept that
Yeah.
you will screw up, they will screw up, and think to yourself, okay, when someone else says the wrong thing, what do I need from them in order to be able to move on? When I
Yeah.
say the wrong thing, what can I do to make it okay? That's the second thing, is prepare for mistakes. And the third thing I will say is stop trying to change people's minds.
Yeah.
It's the most ridiculous, futile exercise ever. So we know, neurologically speaking, that you can't. We have zero evidence that in a conversation you can change somebody's mind. Not happening. I mean, I would love to see the person who's going to tell me the story of the last time they were in a real disagreement. I'm not talking about like pineapple on pizza. I'm talking about like a real disagreement. And they had a conversation with someone and were like, you know what? You are completely right. And I've been wrong this whole time. I am going to stop thinking that. Like, it has not happened. And so if you stop going into the conversations and making your goal to
Oh,
change their mind,
right.
then what's the goal? Why are you having that conversation? Maybe instead of changing their mind, your goal should be, okay, we disagree. Let me learn as much as possible about their point of view. I'm going to try to figure it out.
Do you think that we as a country are disagreeing more? And let me preface this question because it probably sounds really like a dumb question at its face. But we hear so often about the tribalism and the divisiveness in our country. When I go out into the world, I feel it less than I actually hear about it. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are because actually your book was written or released in 2017 and it's called We Need to Talk: How to Have Conversations That Matter. And I think our country has changed a lot since 2017. So I'm curious to hear if you think we're really hearing each other less or what's going on.
I actually don't think Americans disagree on most things.
Okay.
I think Americans agree on a lot of stuff. If you actually look at the policies, I mean, we are going to disagree on politics. And by politics, I mean what politicians say and their talking points. When you break it down to the policies, most Americans think teachers should get paid more. Most Americans think there should be laws preventing landlords from just increasing rent. Most
Yeah.
Americans don't like Mitch McConnell at all. Most people think that the government should forgive medical debt. Most people agree that abortion access should be legal. Most people agree that same-sex marriage should continue to be legal. Like there's a lot, most people agree on common sense gun safety reform. When you
Mm.
break things down to their most basic level, we mostly agree. That's the truth. Even in DEI, the majority of Americans believe that the not DEI, the buzzword, but the principles of it, learning
Yeah.
to be fair, learning to be inclusive, are important, and they want a workplace that values those things. So, are we disagreeing more? No, I think we're getting in more arguments because we're we've bought into these politicians' talking points. And I've been a journalist now for over 25 years. Like, I guess I mean, I am biased. I don't like politicians, any of them. I see how the sausage is made. I
Yeah.
know that there's things that they hold back, there's things they fudge the truth on because they're worried about getting reelected. And so I would say do not trust the talking points, the speeches, any of that. Break it down. What are they doing? What do they vote? What are their votes on? What's their voting record? What is the plan? And you might find out that you actually support different candidates than you'd expect.
I find that we're having less discussion and more debate. And I enjoy hearing a debate every so often, particularly like a philosophical debate. Sometimes I think the answer is less important than just having the conversation for the conversation's sake. But the debate of it all seems to be an issue. I guess I come back to listening. I think we're not hearing each other.
We're listening in order to respond, not in order to understand, right?
Right.
I wouldn't use the term debate. I totally understand what you're saying,
Tell
but I
me,
think
yeah.
we're just arguing more. And really what we're doing is just talking more and loudly.
Yeah.
Because debate, my third book, Speaking of Race, it's called Speaking of Race, but really it's about how to have difficult conversations, any difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, I interviewed a man who's an expert in the ethics of rhetoric. Schools used to teach rhetoric, which is the study of how we use language to inform or persuade people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's rules. There's ethical rules, just like the rules of engagement in an armed conflict. We don't think very often about the ethics of conversing with other people. We don't think very often about things like consent, right? If I bring up a story about trauma, do I stop and think, do I have this person's consent to talk about this very
Huh.
difficult subject matter? This may not be the right time for them. Do we think about things like balance, like taking turns? Um, do we think about things like intellectual honesty? Intellectual honesty being, if I say it, I have to believe that it's true. It may not even be true, but I have to truly believe that what I'm telling you is the truth. That's
Right.
required in rhetoric. That's not what we're doing. So I wish we were debating more.
Interesting.
We're not.
Have you learned anything about delivering bad news or hard information that people don't want to hear from your daily show?
I end up being pretty good at this.
Please let us in, Celeste.
So one of the things I try to do is I don't give advice anymore. She says after she just spent the past 20 minutes giving advice.
No, I consider that insight.
Yeah, like this is the things I've learned,
Yeah.
right? Um, but I don't give advice because we know that biologically speaking and neurologically speaking, when you give somebody, there's only two situations in which a conversation has negative impacts on a human being. They
Mm-hmm.
are if the conversation's hostile, obviously, or if the conversation involves getting advice. Even if you've requested the advice, your brain reacts in the exact same way as though you've just been punched in the face. It starts the same sequence of events it would if you were attacked. And so
You're not
telling people,
exaggerating?
no, no,
Wow.
I'm simplifying, but I'm not exaggerating. So we have to find a way of informing people without telling them what to do. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And one of the ways is to have a conversation in which you spend most of the time listening, and you're guiding them to find the answer, right?
Does that mean
So
asking questions?
it means asking questions. It means asking good questions. It means especially asking follow-up questions. There's unique power to follow-up questions that makes the other person feel as though they've been heard. It makes them feel as though you are likable, that you are respectful. Because to answer a follow-up question, you had to be listening, right? But you can guide people. So I'll give you an example. Scientists have been trying for a really long, behavioral scientists for a long time, to figure out how to break through confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, for those listening, is when you believe something, you are presented with evidence that is absolutely wrong what you believe, and that makes you believe it harder. We are the only species that suffers from confirmation bias. And they have been trying for a very long time to figure out how to break through it, right? If evidence, clear evidence, doesn't work, what does?
Mm-hmm.
So this one group of scientists found that if you ask questions, forcing somebody to explain all of the the impacts, the ripple effects of their belief, right? Having to walk that through and explain every step of it is the first crack they have seen in confirmation bias, right? So if you say to a person, let's say that somebody doesn't believe in vaccines, and I hear this all the time, right? I want to say at the outset, this is not a vaccine skeptic. That's a science denier. Vaccines are safe and they protect an entire globe. But if you find someone who doesn't believe in vaccines, and they almost always give you evidence that's bogus. And I will say, that's interesting that you mentioned that research. Every other piece of research I've seen says the opposite. Where did you find that? I'd be interested in seeing that. Can you link that to me? Can you send it to me? I would be very interested in seeing that. So let's imagine that we take away the polio vaccine. Walk me through that. Then what happens? So polio will resurface, and then, and then, and then.
Mm.
And as you walk them through this, again, it is not going to happen that they then end the conversation by saying, "You're right, I was wrong this whole time." That's not going to happen. But it is possible that you will be able to just put a tiny little crack, right? Like Leonard Cohen says, the cracks are how the lights gets in. It's possible you could make a crack in that hard shell of absolute certainty that so many people have.
Mm-hmm.
And it does work. It's also a way to deliver bad news, right, to people. So the main thing about delivering bad news is to stop for a moment. Just take a breath and think, what would I need to hear at this moment?
Yeah.
How would I want to hear this? And then move forward. A huge amount of the suggestions I have about conversation involve slowing down. Just taking a breath, slowing it down. And this is one of those things. What would you need before somebody told you this? How would you want to be told? And then listen and watch their reaction, see what they need in that moment. Because they will tell you, and if you're paying attention, you will see.
Yeah, I feel that most oftentimes in hard situations, people really just want your presence because they know there's
They want to
nothing
be
that you can
heard.
say. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really common for when people start to tell you about something tough, that we do that thing, "I know how you feel" thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in the TED Talk too, where I'm saying, don't equate your experience with somebody else's. And I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I do believe that most people are doing this because they think it's going to create an empathic bond. But we also know that it doesn't in most cases. It just is turning the spotlight back on you, right? You then tell about your painful experience, and there's part of them that feels the need to comfort you. When what they want is to be heard, right? If their dog died, they want to tell you about their dog,
Yeah.
how great that dog was, how much they loved that dog. They don't want to hear about your dog that you lost. It doesn't accomplish what you think that it accomplishes.
Celeste, I want to get into the nitty gritty of conversation tools with you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question I most often get asked by friends, family, and listeners of the podcast is, How do you open a conversation, especially if you're at a dinner or a work event and you just don't know what to say? My first question to you is, what question do people ask you most often? And then I want to know the answer to that one.
So the number one question that get asked is always about how to change somebody else's behavior. It's always some form of, how do I get somebody to stop interrupting me? How do I handle someone who talks all the time without stopping, blah blah blah. It's always some version of that. And I can very quickly answer with that, which is, you can't.
Right.
There,
Hard
there's
no.
nothing you can do about other people's behavior. I will say that more than 4 out of 5 people admit that a past relationship has been damaged because of bad communication, but fewer than 1 in 5 think it was their fault. So
Interesting.
we are not taking responsibility for the times when we have not listened, when we have interrupted, when we have escalated things into an argument. And if we focus on what other people are doing all the time, we won't get better. That's the first half of that answer.
Well
The
said.
second one, I love this question because it's so common. And this is another really common question, is tell us 10 things people can say to open a conversation. I can't. There's no 10 things that you can say that are going to work. But, I was at the TED Summit one year, and this scientist from Japan came up, and he said, I've watched you talk like 20 times and I still don't know how to start a conversation. How do you start it?
Hmm.
And, at TED, they have their badges are huge. They're massive. And they'd say where you're from and all this information about you. And his said that he was from Kyoto. And I said, it says you're from Kyoto. I've only ever been to Tokyo. Like, what's Kyoto like? And he was like, well, you've seen the pictures. It's like the cherry trees and the temples. And I was like, yeah, but where do you live? You don't live in the temple. Like, do you guys have streets and little houses, or is that all packed into apartments like in Tokyo? He goes, no, we've got houses. And I'm like, yeah, with a backyard? I mean, do you have pets in a backyard somewhere? Like, tell me what the street looks like. And he starts talking about his street, and he starts talking about his town. And about 5 minutes later, I say, that's how you start a conversation. You ask people questions they know the answer to, about something they care
Yeah.
about their tattoo. People will tell you there's not the story behind their tattoo. There is always a story behind the tattoo. Like, they got up that morning and chose what to put on. Ask them about the things that they're wearing. Ask them about anything that you see. Take a good look at this person in front of you
Yep.
and ask.
I have a follow up about that because that's considered good small talk. Like I often go, I'm a sneaker person. I love shoes. So if someone's wearing like interesting sneakers or even not interesting sneakers, I'm like, oh, are you a New Balance person? I'm a Nike person. Like, how long have you been wearing those? And it's just kind of fun banter, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's easy and low stakes. But I have heard people say that you shouldn't really ask people about their appearance or something they're wearing. I've found that personally not to be the case. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I've never found that to be the case.
Okay.
I mean, if somebody is clearly in economic distress, and therefore what they're wearing is not by choice, but by necessity,
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask them about that. There's other things to talk about,
Yeah.
like, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
But I have never found that to be the case.
Okay.
Don't assume people are more sensitive than they are. The behavioral studies have shown that um, people overestimate the extent to which other people will be offended by something, or how sensitive they are.
Mm.
If they don't want to tell you, you'll say, "Oh, I hate these sneakers," and you're like, "Oh, okay." Fine, then blah 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 blah. I have sneakers I hate too. Mine came from my aunt, who is the worst buyer of presents ever.
Yes.
You can then start a question about giving presents. Like, people are either good present buyers or really not. I have found that to be true.
Yes.
I mean, you can start conversations about all kinds of things, but people choose what they wear in the morning.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, and
so
it's
they
a
put
good
that on by
opener.
choice. I think
Yeah.
so too. Yeah, they'll wear a hat. A guy was walking by, was wearing a Kansas City hat, but I know he grew up in Wisconsin, and I was like, "What the heck here?" And he's like, "Well, my dad grew up in Kansas City, and so he always had us watching the Kansas City game." He starts telling me the blah 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 blah. Terry Gross, who hosts a show on NPR called Fresh Air, she says, "Tell me about yourself" is the only opener you'll ever need, and I have found that to be true.
Okay, so tell me more about what you mean because I think I think you and I actually, from understanding your work, disagree on only one thing. Okay? And it's open-ended questions. I have found that open-ended questions startle people. Like if you said to me, "Tell me about yourself," I'm like, I'm from Chicago," and it's like not specific enough for me to dive headfirst in. What do you think?
Right. So tell me about yourself isn't an open-ended question, right? It's not a question. Um,
I'll
I
write it to
think what she's
command.
really using that about is as sort of a metaphor for any question that invites people to tell you about themselves.
Right.
But open-ended questions are the type of questions that invite people to say more, right? I have heard people there's this habit of asking questions in a way where you answer it yourself. Like I'll give you an example. People will say, um, "Hey, what time you coming home tonight? 6? No, no, you have that meeting that's going to go to what? What did you say? 6:30? You know, you're really going to hit traffic by then. Even if you take the back way up, you probably won't get here till like 7:30. Do you have a full tank? I'm not. No, I drove it yesterday and it was nearly empty. So you probably want to make sure you get. I mean, 5 minutes later, they have not allowed the other person to respond at all. And it's
Right.
partly because we have this fear of giving up control
Mm.
of the conversation. The number one fear that most people have when they hesitate to start a conversation is they are afraid they'll get stuck in it and won't be able to get out. Now, the interesting thing to me is these people who are surveyed cannot give a single example of a time when that happened. When they were stuck in a conversation and unable to get out,
Right.
right?
I
But
used to
that's
feel that way,
their fear.
Celeste.
How did you get over it?
I actually had to interview people, and I interviewed people mostly in hospitality because they're so adept at moving in and out of conversation quickly because they're at a party or a restaurant and they have to be gracious and warm and move on quickly. And I got great tips from them. And I thought, you know what? I'm never offended if somebody moves on from a conversation from me. So I'm going to stop assuming offense the way you just said, overstating the assumption, and just move on politely.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you bring up here. And when I do workshops for people, I will spend time having them practice leaving a conversation.
Oh, I love
I'll be
that.
like, all you have to do is say, "I got to go. It's so great to see you. See you later." And
Yeah.
just spend whatever excuse they want. Just practice it over and over and over again so they're ready with it. You know, what you're talking about, asking people from hospitality, is another thing, a piece of advice that I give people all the time, which you did naturally. You know, when people are hesitant to start conversations, I say, go talk to those people who are being paid to be nice to you. Go start the conversation with your barista because A, you know it's time limited. It has to end quickly. It's going to be maybe 90 seconds. And B, that they have to be nice to you,
Yeah,
right? And so the stakes
that's
are
great advice.
super, super low. And yet we know that even under those circumstances, you're still going to get a boost to your mood. You're still going to get a boost to your sense of belonging. Like
Mhm.
your body will respond. That's sort of the beauty of it.
Okay, wait, I want to go back to our open-ended questions moment. So, can you share more about open-ended questions? Take me through how you do that because you really are an expert at it and you don't leave people feeling startled.
Yeah, an open-ended question just means a question that can't be answered with yes or no,
Okay.
right? That's what an open-ended question is. It's open-ended. But I would take it a little bit further and say you want to keep your question brief.
Mm.
You want to make the other person feel as though you're really curious. And this is the thing about any question at all. It needs to come from a sincere place of curiosity. So, whatever it is that you need to get in your head to get you into that frame of mind, the book Speaking of Race has some suggestions, by the way, some exercises if this is tough for people, to get yourself into that headspace of, I wonder. You know, when I'm preparing for an interview, I'm not asking questions for myself. I'm a surrogate for the audience. They're not going to get the chance to sit down with the Secretary of Defense. So I need to be their surrogate. And I
Mhm.
have to sit there and ask myself, okay, what would most people want to know? Right? If they were talking to Michelle Obama, what would people want to know?
Are you
And
able to separate your own curiosity? That's pretty remarkable.
yeah, I think so.
Wow.
I mean,
How do
I
you get into their
oftentimes satisfy
headspace?
my own quick curiosity as well, right? Sometimes I'll read some wild story from their past and I'll be like, okay, I read this thing and I have to know if this is true, right? Like, but yeah, I'm able to sit there and think, what, here's what I think to myself. What is, what can this person tell me that no one else can?
Hmm. That's a
Right?
great question.
The logistics, the details about things, anybody can tell you that. You know, the stories that everybody's heard before, everyone can tell you that. But what can this person tell me that only they know? And that's the most useful conversation, is to really dig into some what they know best. You know what, it frustrates me to no end when people bring in, especially artists, musicians, writers, and they don't ask them about their craft, right? Like, you bring in a musician who's a slap guitarist and you don't ask them about that? Like, how, why would you do this? This is the thing they've been doing for 30 years. It's clearly the thing they care most about in life.
Hmm.
If you're trying to get something good about them, ask them about the craft. You know, I did an interview with Toni Morrison, and I didn't know this when I was doing the interview. It was when she had the opera based on her novel Beloved was premiering, and I didn't know this, but I guess she was notoriously a very, very difficult interview. Um, she had walked out on interviews. She would clam up,
Wow.
and I ended up having like a nearly hour-long conversation with her. They had to ask her to get up, leave because somebody else was coming in. And later on, when I was at a fellowship, they were like, Celeste, we want you to talk to the rest of the fellows about how you got Toni Morrison to talk. And I was stunned. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, I read her books. Like, that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that's totally true of many of the best interviews that I've had, is that I listened to their work, right? I interviewed John Irving, who again is another notorious difficult interview. And his press person warned us many times in advance, you know. But I read his book and I had so many questions. And there was like this one chunk of the book. And I was like, okay, look, I know that people say this all the time and it's usually bunk. But I think you are writing about yourself here. And stay with me. I'm going to explain why. And I get to the end of it. And he's like, holy cow. He's like, you're right. I think you're right. And when
Wow.
he's leaving, he told his press person, okay, I'll come back and do an interview with her anytime. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just reading their work. I'm looking through the work that they have done, their actual work. I'm not asking about their 4 divorces or their relationship with their dad. I mean, that's okay if that's what they want to talk about. What they really want to talk about is their work.
That's actually an interesting perspective in terms of small talk and sort of the idea of clamming up, because everybody knows something that you don't,
Yeah,
and
Bill
so to
Nye, right?
just
Yeah.
right, to like find out what that is and hone in on it and just be really curious about the most niche thing possible. They light up talking about it. I was sat next to a guy on the plane who ran golf courses around the world. I know very little about that industry. I peppered him with questions, and he was like, I never talk to people on a plane. I can't believe we talked the whole time. And I was like, yeah, you sat next to the wrong person, but everybody does know something. Um, Speaking of knowing, in your TED Talk, one of your tips for better conversations is, if you don't know, say you don't know. Why is there power in admitting something that you don't know?
Well, first, pretending to know something about everything erodes trust.
Yeah.
There's times when someone talks about something, that one article in the New Yorker today, right? And you're really quickly Googling it on your phone underneath the table so you can try to add it to the conversation. We know, subconsciously, we know that other people cannot know something about everything. So when they pretend to, they speak in a way that pretends knowledge at some level, we know some of it, some percentage of it is bullshit. We know some of it's bullshit, but we just don't know which. So we start to get a little skeptical of everything, because that might just be the bullshit. No, wait, that might be the bullshit. it erodes trust. One of the professions that has the hardest time saying, I don't know. In fact, the profession that has the hardest time, it's not lawyers, it's doctors. And we can understand, right? Like, you don't want to go to the doctor and be like, okay, doc, what's wrong with me? And they go, heck if I know, right? Like, you get why.
Yes.
But what happens is doctors guess all the time. And the American Medical Association would like them to stop doing that. So they've run some experiments, and in one, they had their control group, right, where they just kept going on and doing what they're doing. But the other
Right.
group, they taught them to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And they spent months doing this with patients, and they were scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
They thought all those patients would leave to find a doctor who had more knowledge, right? But at the end of the months-long experiment, those doctors who said, I don't know, but I'll find out, the trust in them was significantly higher. The patient's estimation of their knowledge, of their smarts, of their experience went up, not down, because it increases trust. And I hope everybody does the same thing. I don't know about this. Also, let other people be experts in what they do. Learn from them. Let other people tell you. I mean, everybody has an experience with someone else who knows nothing about their job, giving them advice on how to do their job. Even retail clerks, even janitors know what that feels like, and it's not great. So let's
Absolutely.
not do it to other people.
Do you think you're able to tell in interviews when people are full of it?
No. I mean, I do a lot of prep. I'm sure you do too. So
Yeah.
if they're saying stuff that I know is factually incorrect, I will correct it. But
Yeah.
I can't tell who's lying. I mean, I just tend to trust people what they're saying about themselves. People
Yeah.
blame Oprah for what it was, a million little pieces or whatever it was, not knowing that was all. I wouldn't have known. Like, which of
Yeah.
us would have known that?
No one
I
could have
have
known
no
that
idea.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do get feelings about people, but I don't
Do
know.
you?
I do. I get spidey senses, but I try not to vocalize them because, um, you know, they could be wrong. You don't want to like share that, but I do. I do get. I think we get them in conversation, and so interviews are just like another version of conversation.
That's a rare gift, though, because the vast majority of people, I mean, up into the 80, 90 percentiles, have absolutely no accuracy when it comes to detecting lies. Their confidence in their ability to detect lies is pretty high. Most people think they can.
Interesting.
But it's a rare gift because the vast majority of us cannot tell a lie from not a lie.
I don't
We
think
just think we
I
can.
can, yeah, I don't think I can tell a lie per se, but at the end of the interview, I can feel
You're probably
sincerity.
sensing inauthenticity,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. That's what I can
Yeah.
sense. Um,
Yeah, that's that's a gift.
that's nice of you.
That's a good skill for an interviewer to have.
Thank you. Do you feel like you have a sort of gift in this? Like, what is everyone sort of has the lens through which they see things? I think like Oprah, like her lens was spirituality. Barbara Walters, to me, there was always a question behind the question. Like she knew she was getting to something other than what she was saying. What is your thing?
I think I'm the queen of the follow-up question.
That's a gift.
Yeah, because I really listen, and people will say stuff and surprise you with what they say. And I will sometimes be like, whoa, 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 wait, stop for just a second. Did you just say digga 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 da? And they were like, yeah, I guess I did, right? Or I'll repeat back their words to them, and people will reveal themselves to you in a beautiful, wondrous, magical way. Even if what they're saying is neither beautiful nor wondrous, it's kind of a magical transaction, the revealing of a human mind
Mm-hmm.
through conversation. People will say stuff that's unexpected. Like, I hate to do an interview where there's no surprise. Sometimes surprise for me, sometimes just a surprise for the listeners, and sometimes a surprise for the interviewee. And I think that that's probably my special skill. I also have a really good
Beautiful.
skill of explaining very complicated things to people in a way that they understand.
Yes. And that is so rare. That is true. That is a gift.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but it's now come up so many times that I've sort of accepted, oh, I guess this is relatively unique, but I'm very good at it.
Yes, you
Um,
are. And it's
yeah.
hard to break down medical studies and neuroscience and share it in a way that's interesting and digestible. Okay, so you mentioned in your book that you've had moments in your career where you've suffered because you couldn't seem to make yourself understood during important conversations. What was holding you back, and what did you need to switch up in order to get your point across?
I think the main thing holding me back was self-consciousness.
Mhm.
I was way too wrapped up in my inner monologue. And look, like most other people, my inner monologue is not very kind, right? I was just trying to be so careful and say exactly the right thing. And I was also anticipating pushback. We'll rehearse these things in our head and we'll practice arguments. Right. And then I said, you know, um, and I was preparing myself for the wrong thing. I was preparing myself to try to defend myself when
Mm,
no one had attacked me yet. um, and also, I didn't give any thought whatsoever into what I needed to hear from them, what I needed to learn from them. All of my preparation was on what I was going to say.
mm,
And it was about like the most superficial thing, either what words to use, you know, which doesn't help at all. I think a common thing, I used to believe that I would get too emotional. That's not true. Don't let people tell you not to bring emotion into a conversation. First of all, it's complete bullshit. There's no such thing as a conversation that doesn't have an emotion in it. But also, emotion is important data. It's information for us. We are big brained social animals, and our emotion is information. It's
yeah.
your subconscious trying to tell you something, um, and ignore it at your peril. So when I was getting emotional and wrapped up, very often what I was feeling was frustration.
Mhm.
And that was important for me to realize at that moment. I was frustrated because I wasn't expressing what I needed to express. And what I really need to do that moment is say, give me a moment for a second. Let me get my head straight. Okay, I'm going to start over. Here's the issue. Here's what I need. Now, what's the issue from your point of view?
Mhm.
And how do we move forward? Right? Like that's what I needed to do.
Do you have tools now in terms of how to handle conversations with people who are not capable of meeting you in a meaningful conversation?
So it depends on what flavor of not meeting me you mean.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a conversation in which someone is disrespecting me, abusing me in any way, shape, or form, I mean, abusing me by using belittling language, dehumanizing me, etc., walk away.
Yeah.
Just walk away. There's no point. If you're talking about not meeting me because they're wrapped up in their own stuff,
Mhm.
yeah, my tool is to say, hold on a second. Whoa, I feel like you're not hearing me. My sense is that you're not hearing me. It feels as though you're really focused on what's going on in your head. So let's deal with that first because
Yeah.
I need to be heard. Let's talk about what's happening with you and then me. Okay. Is that a deal? My tools are almost all related to just bringing the unspoken out into the open, making the undiscussable discussable. And one of the
Mm.
comparisons I use in the book is like when you're at a play and there's a really dramatic scene and the female actor's wig starts to slide off her head. Like you can try to ignore it, but that's the only thing no one is hearing any of the things they're saying. They're only concerned about that wig. It's the same thing in conversations when stuff is unspoken.
Yeah.
You just have to pull a wig off or secure it again, whatever it may be, and then move forward. And I found that in conversations too, where I'll be like, hey, I saw an expression on your face. I interpreted that as that I said something wrong. Is that true? Is that right? Am I accurate? I just bring it out into the open now.
I think that's great advice, even though you don't give advice. It's good insight. One of the things that I struggle to communicate is how to foster curiosity. Um, I I've found that reading helps foster curiosity, but other than that, if somebody feels as if they're not innately super curious, which is sort of, I think, the very beginning or the first seeds of conversation, are there things that we can do to foster our own curiosity or even plant it within children, like at the dinner table?
So role playing is incredibly powerful. And I know that people feel
Huh.
silly when we talk about role playing. I'm not trying to, you know, enlist anyone in an improv class or anything, but it is shocking um how powerfully we can affect and even change a mind by asking people to role play. So when it
Yeah.
comes to curiosity, I want people to, what questions would you ask if you were, this was your pet subject? Like if you're talking to a chess master, you yourself, you don't care about chess. We know that. But let's imagine that you were a nerdy kid who like thinks chess is the greatest thing ever. Then what would you ask? Right?
Hmm.
Here's this gardener. Let's imagine that gardening is your frickin' jam. Then what would you say? And you can start to foster curiosity that way. The other thing is to,
That's cool.
what I was saying before is like to look for the stuff that surprises you.
Hmm.
Look for the contradictions, right? The vegetarian who makes their own barbecue sauce, right? Look for the inherent contradictions because everyone has contradictions in their life. And then maybe that's what sparks your curiosity. Imagine if you were in their shoes. What decisions would you have made differently? How would you have handled what they went through? And you can, by creating that connection with your own personal experience, you can start to foster curiosity. Curiosity is about, I hate to repeat myself, but it's about slowing down just a little and looking at all the different sides of what it is until you find the side that sparks a neuron in your head.
Has all of this research deepened connections in your own life?
Oh yeah, I'm a better person. I mean, there's not very
Yeah.
many other ways to do that. To say that I'm a better, kinder, more compassionate, more moral,
Hmm.
a better friend. I'm a great gift buyer because I listen. Right. Um,
Oh, there's a connection. That's
I'm a
interesting.
better person with a better life, with more love in my life, with more
Hmm.
people I can rely on. When I was younger, I don't know who, I probably, the people I could have called in case of emergency was, there's maybe two or three of them. Right. I'm, uh, I have a dysfunctional family, so my family's not among them. Now, pff, I got a whole call list. Give me the roster. There's so many people that can rely on me and who I can rely on. Life is better.
I think sometimes we put a lot of energy into thinking about conversations with new people, with work, sort of like in networking. Um, we think about conversation as a tool to get something oftentimes. Um, and
Transactional.
yeah, the best conversations are the opposite. It's really about giving for sure. But I am curious about how we can apply some of these small talk, low stakes ideas or lessons to the people closest to us, because I think um, we forget to ask the people close to us the real curious questions. We kind of just ask about the weather, the day, what you ate, um, and to me, those are the moments to really that's where the open-ended questions and the follow-ups really shine.
Yeah, and the book that I'm currently working on right now is about my great grandmother, and I find myself over the course of this wishing so much that I had asked my grandparents more questions.
Yeah.
Um, and I hear that often about people who, after they've lost a loved one, and you can't hear those stories anymore, wishing they'd asked more, that they listened more. A lot of people think of conversation as something we're doing for other people, right? okay, I'm going to be nice and I'm going to listen, really listen. And it's so hard. It's so hard. It's so hard. But okay, I'll listen. They're so boring. Oh my God, when are they going to stop talking? I'm going to listen. And it's true
Hmm.
that listening to others is a gift that we give to others, but we really underestimate how much it does for us. Ralph Nichols, a scientist who is called the father of listening, said that the most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and be understood.
Hmm.
And the best way to understand people is to listen to them. You know, I often ask when I'm doing like workshops or whatever, I'll ask people to take a moment and think about the last time they felt really heard, like really heard, like the other person really understood them, um, and what that felt like. You know, that feeling of being heard. That is just an irreplaceable experience for us. We can have that experience. We can also give that experience to other people for no money, for no investment.
Yeah.
And think about how much that one small change could change the world. All the things going wrong. I'm not trying to be simplistic or naive here, but think of all the things going wrong in the world and how just that experience of feeling understood can change the course of history. Like that's a gift you can give every day, every day.
That was so beautiful, Celeste. You almost brought me to tears.
Oh, thanks.
It's really true. It is. I do you feel seen and heard very often, or is it rare for you?
Oh no, I do all the time. I mean, I have
It's
surrounded myself
amazing.
with people who are loving and open-hearted and smart. Surround yourself with, okay, I will give one piece of advice. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are. It is the best.
It's
It
the
is the
best.
best ever. Yeah, yes, I am very, very lucky.
I do a little rapid fire to tie things up. So if you'll indulge me, I have like five or six for you.
Okay.
How important are names in conversation?
I'm terrible with names, so I'm biased and I'm going to say not that important. Although we do get a real big, nice boost of our mood when someone else says our name. So learn people's names.
What is something you're currently trying to improve upon?
Learning people's names. No, seriously, it's a lifelong, lifelong work in progress to get better at remembering people's names. I'm terrible, terrible at it. But yes.
So funny. I am too. And we're both
Terrible.
conversationalists. I don't
I
know what
know.
that is.
Professional. Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Okay, something about your future that you love imagining.
I love to imagining retiring. I'm going to be so good at retirement. I'm going to be the best retire. Like if they graded retirement, I would be absolute 4.0 retiree. I'm going to be excellent
Really?
at it. Yeah.
Are you going to be on island time? What's the plan?
I mean, I'm just going to do the stuff I want to do. I'm going to visit every miniatures museum in the whole country. I'm going to like find every isolated cabin ever and go up there with a big bag of groceries. Like I am just going to, you know, I'm going to do nothing at all.
That is
Absolutely
so
nothing.
funny. I would not have guessed that. Okay, if someone feels socially awkward or anxious, what's one small step they can take today to become more comfortable in conversation?
Ask more questions. When you're asking other people questions, all the pressure is off of you. Also, I will mention that research that began at Harvard showed that talking about yourself, what you like, what you know, what you don't like, activates the same pleasure center in the brain as sex and heroin. So if you allow other people the opportunity to talk about themselves by asking them questions, you are giving them a very pleasurable feeling and they will think you're the greatest person ever.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. A book that changed your life, something you think everybody should read.
Let me go back to the OG and say that Bleak House from Charles Dickens was one of the books that really changed my life.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
but I would go back to even the Pickwick Papers, because when you talk about listening to people, that book is like disconnected and disjointed, but he's so good at giving you a feeling for a character within a couple paragraphs, like every distinct individual and their own little foibles and how it makes them who they are. And it's a really good reflection of, our own global community.
Cool. That's not a recommendation that I've gotten on the podcast yet. So thank you for that.
Nice.
Okay, I do a question everything card every single time. So please just tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay. What's your favorite scent?
It has become pine, which
You were meant to be in a cabin in the woods, Celeste.
right? I never would have guessed that. And Celeste younger would be like, what is this? A 75-year-old's Buick? But no, the scent of pine is very comforting to me.
I am I loved hearing at the beginning of this conversation that you weren't always this remarkable in conversation. I think it's so inspiring that it really is something that you can think about, learn about, practice, and apply to your own life.
Thanks. Yeah, if I'm just waiting for the day when somebody gets my old college roommates online and they start talking about how terrible I was in the past. I'm also not great all the time on planes. Like
Mhm.
we could do an event like a keynote or something, and it is emotionally exhausting.
Yes.
And then I get on the plane and I'm like, don't look at me, don't touch me, don't make eye contact with me. So there's times when you have to know your limitations, even now,
And you have to
right?
recharge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have one bucket of social energy each day, and there's no refilling it until the next day. So conserve it, spend it wisely.
I think that being a good communicator in America, at least, is quite profitable. Um, there's a lot of research that states that like all these great American companies are built on the foundation of questions. Apple employs the Socratic method. Eric Schmidt says that Google's a company built on questions, not answers. Do you have research to share about companies and leadership in terms of curiosity and asking questions? Also, you're making the funniest face you've made this entire interview, so I'm really curious what you're going to say.
So, yeah, first of all, I'm the worst poker player in the world. I can't lie to save my life. So, if anyone hadn't noticed, yes. Second of all, I need to ask you what your favorite scent is because it's bothering me.
Ooh, thank you for asking. This sounds so strange, but my grandfather, I wouldn't know how to describe it. The top of his head, he was bald, and I would come and give him a hug and smell his head and kiss him on the head when I would walk into the house, and I
Must
can't
have been like
recreate
hair
that
oil or
smell.
something.
Yes. Yeah,
Huh.
I know.
Maybe
But
sunscreen.
otherwise, maybe some sort of wonderful like Le Labo candle.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it was sitting in the back of my head,
Thanks for
repeating over and over.
asking.
So I don't have specific research on that. We have lots of research on question answering, question asking, et cetera, but not on that as part of a corporate leader's um, personality. However, I will say that we have a ton of research on empathic leadership. And part of empathic leadership is learning how to listen and ask empathic questions, as opposed to most people ask questions that are either dismissive or they're part of the righting reflex, meaning people are rushing to solve things when someone comes to us with an issue. Immediately going to, oh my God, you should read this book I read, or blah, 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 where we have this writing reflex. Let's make it right. Or they're dismissive, or, oh, I know exactly how you feel, which is dismissive, or, whatever it may be. It'll get better. It's all going to be okay. That's dismissive. So we know a lot about empathic leadership, and we know that that's basically the only kind of leadership that brings your team members well-being.
Mm.
It also just happens to improve productivity. It also happens to reduce turnover, reduce burnout, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, empathy, especially if it then takes the next step toward compassion, which is emotion in action, that's what you need to be. And now we don't hire for that. We hire for the opposite. But we also know that the majority of leaders fail. We're hiring the wrong people. We're recruiting for the wrong personality traits. There's a great book that's on some of this research, which was called something like "Why are so many men such terrible leaders?" Um, I'm getting the title wrong, and I'm very sorry to Tomas, but there's all this just a data dump of fascinating research on the
Mm.
fact that we hire for the wrong qualities. And a lot of the companies that I see that say they pride themselves on asking questions, what they're doing is performative listening. And they say they listen to customers, but if what you hear doesn't change your behavior or decisions at all, you're not actually listening.
Well said.
It's just a performance. I don't think Apple is particularly good at listening. They certainly don't listen to their consumers, right? Same with Google. Come on, give me a break. Maybe it was that kind of company when Eric Schmidt was running it. He's not running it anymore.
Yeah.
And performative listening is worse than not listening at all.
Performative anything. Yeah. Are there power dynamics in conversation?
Oh, all the time. Um, Interrupting is a power dynamic, right? We know that it makes people feel dominant. There's all sorts of ways in which, when you start to talk to somebody, your brain makes a calculation that happens so quickly and so far beneath your level of consciousness that you have no idea what is going on. But your brain makes a calculation as to whether the person you're speaking to is above, the same, or below your rank in intelligence, in power, etc. And if they are below your rank, you're really going to have trouble listening to them. Your brain will almost immediately shut it off. And it'll take a lot more effort to listen to them. This is happening to everybody, and it's happening again before you have a chance to intervene. The other thing I will say is that the smarter you are, you were talking about your family, the smarter you are, the higher the likelihood that you're bad in conversation.
Bad?
Bad.
Wait, that's hilarious. What do you mean?
The higher your IQ, the worse your conversational skills in general. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. One of them is that when you are smart, you know a lot, and you enter conversations getting ready to tell other people what you know. So you're not listening. Another one is that smarter people tend to try to deal with others in a logical way. And no conversation is logical. In fact, human beings are not logical. We're not logical thinkers. So,
Wow.
yeah. Another thing is that the higher your IQ, the more you are subject to unconscious bias, the more likely you are to discriminate based on the stereotypes that live in your subconscious than others. And part of that is because you think you're smart, and so you think you're protected against bias. You think all the decisions that you've made are really well thought out and logical. And that assumption that you're protected against it actually makes you more vulnerable to it. And the final thing, which is what I'm getting to, is that you don't listen to people. You assume you know what they're going to say. And so they get 10 seconds into what they're saying, and your brain is going, so you can get to what you're going to say in response, and you don't listen. The listening and talking use much of the exact same parts of the brain. You cannot do them both at the same time. Meaning you cannot both listen to what someone's saying and be thinking about what you're going to say in response.
I had somebody one time, I got on a phone call and he said, if I pause in between what you're saying and what I'm saying, don't be alarmed. I'm sometimes slow because I'm really taking in what you're saying. And at first I was like, that's a little strange. I've never had anybody say that to me. And after the conversation, I really appreciated what he taught me something, because he wasn't listening to respond to me. He was really taking me in. And I thought, that is really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. I wish more people did that.
Celeste, you are such a fun conversation partner. I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you for this.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. It's been a true joy.
You're so wonderful.